"I'd trade anything for one night with you," the mountain man whispered to the widow. And then he did. A blizzard roars across the Colorado highlands as a ragged stranger stumbles to a lonely cabin light. Inside, a grieving widow grips her shotgun, ready to turn him away. But when he offers everything he owns for one night's shelter, mercy wins over fear. By morning, she finds the army medallion that ties him to her husband's death. Her kindness turns to fury, and he vanishes into the storm. Days later, he returns, carrying a fevered native child and the truth she was never meant to know. Now soldiers are riding up the valley, led by a man who hides more sin than law. The widow must choose: deliver the trapper to justice, or defy the army and protect an innocent life. Can a single night of mercy melt a lifetime of guilt? And when love stands trial against vengeance, which will survive the storm? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wind howled like a wounded beast across the San Juan Pass, driving sheets of snow that cut like knives through any exposed skin. Adam Boone struggled forward, his legs heavy as lead in the knee-deep drifts. His weathered face was nearly frozen, ice crusting his beard and eyelashes. Each breath felt like swallowing glass. Behind him, his faithful mule Tony gave a pitiful groan and stumbled. Adam turned back, his heart sinking as the animal's legs buckled beneath it. He'd pushed the poor beast too hard, trying to outrace the storm. "Come on, old friend," he urged, tugging the lead rope. But Tony only blinked his snow-crusted eyes and lay still, too exhausted to rise. Adam's hands trembled as he unfastened the packs. He couldn't save both the supplies and the mule. "Rest here," he murmured, patting Tony's neck. "I'll come back for you when it lets up." The promise felt hollow, even as he spoke it. Shouldering what he could carry, Adam pressed on through the whiteout. The cold had worked its way deep into his bones, making his thoughts sluggish. How long had he been walking? Minutes or hours? The world had shrunk to an endless white void. Then, there, a faint golden flicker through the curtain of snow. Adam blinked hard, afraid it was just another trick of his failing vision. But the light remained steady, beckoning like a star fallen to earth. Hope gave him fresh strength. He stumbled toward the glow, finally making out the dark shape of a cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising blessed warmth within. Adam's legs were numb blocks of ice as he climbed the 3 steps to the door. His knock was weak, his frozen fingers barely able to form a fist. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then came the unmistakable click of a shotgun being cocked. "Who's there?" a woman's voice called, sharp with suspicion. "A traveler," Adam managed through chattering teeth. "Got caught in the storm. My mule went down a mile back." "Keep moving," the voice ordered. "There's nothing for you here." "Please," he begged, slumping against the doorframe. "I can't feel my feet. One night is all I ask, just till morning." "I said move on!" The bitter cold was stealing the last of his strength. In desperation, Adam played his final card. "Ma'am, I'd trade anything for one night with you. Just warmth and a roof. I'm no threat to you. I give you my word." The silence stretched so long he thought she'd abandoned the door. Then came the sound of a bolt being drawn back. The door opened just wide enough to reveal a woman's face, lined with wariness. The shotgun barrel pointed steadily at his chest. "One wrong move and I'll put you down where you stand," she warned. "Understand?" Adam nodded weakly. "Yes, ma'am. Much obliged." She stepped back, allowing him just enough space to shuffle inside. The wave of warmth from the hearth nearly brought him to his knees. The cabin's interior was spare but neat, A few chairs, a table, some shelves lined with preserves. A collection of dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with a subtle, pleasant scent. "Stay by the fire," the woman ordered, keeping the shotgun trained on him. "Don't come near me or my things." Adam sank gratefully onto the plank floor near the hearth. His limbs tingled painfully as sensation returned. Through half-closed eyes, he studied his reluctant hostess. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 30 or so, with dark hair pulled back severely from a face that might once have been soft with happiness. Now it was set in hard lines, like a mask carved from wood. Her clothes were plain but well-maintained, the mark of someone who took pride in making do with little. "Name's Adam Boone," he offered, trying to ease the tension. "I'm much obliged for your kindness, Mrs. Kavanaugh," she replied shortly. "Natalia Kavanaugh. And it's not kindness, it's Christian duty, nothing more." Adam nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Still, thank you." She settled into a chair by the table, shotgun across her lap. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm raged on, rattling the shutters like angry fists demanding entry. As warmth slowly returned to his body, Adam became aware of other details. A Bible lay open on the table beside a half-finished piece of mending. A pair of men's boots stood in the corner, covered in dust. And there was something else, a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with the storm. The cabin felt like a place where laughter had died. "Your husband," he began carefully. "Is he dead?" Natalia cut him off. "A year ago this winter." Her voice was flat, brooking no sympathy. Adam fell silent. He recognized the sharp edges of grief when he saw them. He had his own store of memories best left undisturbed. The hours crept by. Natalia maintained her vigil, barely moving except to add another log to the fire, when needed. Adam dozed fitfully, his dreams troubled by the howling wind and the ghost of guilt that always rode his shoulder. Once, he woke to find her studying him with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, her face closing like a door against the world. When hunger gnawed at him, Adam reached for his pack and pulled out a strip of dried venison. After a moment's hesitation, he held it out toward Natalia. "Share my supper?" She shook her head. "I don't need charity." "Not charity, payment, for shelter." Something flickered in her eyes, perhaps surprise at his persistence, or memory of better days when hospitality wasn't weighted with fear. Finally, she reached out and took the offered meat. They ate in silence, watched by the dancing flames. The storm showed no sign of weakening, hurling itself against the cabin walls with renewed fury. But inside, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. The space between them felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge waiting to be built. "You said you lost your mule," Natalia spoke suddenly. "Where?" "About a mile back, maybe less. Good animal. Name's Tony. Been with me 5 years?" She nodded slowly. "If he survived the night, maybe we can find him tomorrow. I have a barn." Adam looked at her, startled by this unexpected softening. "That's kind of you." "It's not kindness," she repeated, but with less edge than before. "No animal deserves to freeze to death." The night deepened. Natalia's head began to nod, despite her determination to stand guard. Adam pretended not to notice when she jerked awake, her hands tightening reflexively on the shotgun. "Sleep," he said quietly. "I gave my word. I'll keep it." She straightened in her chair, fighting exhaustion. "I don't know you. Can't trust you." "No," he agreed. "You can't. But you took a chance letting me in. Trust that much, at least." Their eyes met across the firelit space. Something passed between them. Not trust exactly, but perhaps the seed of understanding. Two souls weathering different storms, finding brief shelter in each other's presence. Finally, Natalia's chin dropped to her chest. Her breathing deepened, though her hands remained on the shotgun. Adam watched over her sleep as she had watched over his, keeping faith with the bargain struck between them. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within the cabin's walls, a fragile peace had been achieved. One night of mercy, bought with desperation and sealed with honor. It wasn't much, just warmth and a roof, as he'd begged. But sometimes the smallest mercies could open the widest doors. Dawn crept over the mountains like a wounded thing, the storm's fury barely diminished. Pale light filtered through frost-rimed windows, casting weak shadows across the cabin floor where Adam stirred from his rest by the dying fire. The smell of coffee reached him first, rich and promising. He opened his eyes to find Natalia already up, moving quietly around her small kitchen. Space. She'd kept the shotgun close, propped against the counter within easy reach. "Morning," he offered, voice rough from sleep. She acknowledged him with a slight nod, pouring the coffee into 2 tin cups. After a moment's hesitation, she brought one to him, keeping a careful distance as she set it on the floor nearby. "Much obliged," Adam said, wrapping his hands around the warm metal. His fingers were stiff from the cold, but the worst of yesterday's numbness had faded. Natalia returned to her post by the kitchen counter, studying him over the rim of her own cup. In the gray morning light, he could better see the details of her face, the shadows under her eyes, the stern set of her mouth that couldn't quite hide its natural curve toward gentleness. Adam reached for his pack, pulling out his basic repair kit. The leather straps had taken a beating in yesterday's storm, and his snowshoes needed attention. As he worked, he felt her watching him, gauging his movements like someone used to measuring threats. "I can repay your kindness," he said, testing the strength of a newly mended strap. "Saw your woodpiles running low. I'm good with an axe." "The storm," she began, "won't kill me now that I'm warm and rested." He met her gaze steadily. "Let me settle my debt." Something flickered in her expression, pride warring with practicality. The woodpile was indeed low, and winter still had months to run. "Very well," she said finally. "Axe is in the barn, but I'll be watching." Adam nodded, understanding both the warning and the trust it represented. He pulled on his coat, now mostly dry from its night by the fire, and stepped out into the biting wind. The barn stood 30 paces from the cabin, a solid structure built to withstand mountain winters. Inside, he found tools hanging in neat rows, evidence of a woman who knew the value of maintaining what she had. The axe was well cared for, its edge keen. He worked steadily through the morning, the rhythm of splitting wood familiar to his muscles. The physical labor helped clear his mind, pushing back the memories that always seemed closer in winter. From time to time, he caught glimpses of Natalia through the cabin window, moving about her daily tasks while keeping him in view. By midday, he'd built up a decent sweat despite the cold. The woodpile had grown significantly, neat stacks of split logs ready to ward off winter's chill. His hands were raw but satisfied with honest work. The cabin door opened, and Natalia's voice carried across the yard. "Come eat something." Inside, she'd prepared a simple stew that filled the cabin with savory warmth. They sat at opposite ends of the table, the shotgun now resting against her chair instead of in her lap, a small but noticeable shift. "You handle an axe well," she observed, breaking the silence, "like someone used to making do." "Been on my own a spell," Adam agreed, "learning what needs learning." "And before that?" He paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. The question seemed casual, but there was weight behind it. After a moment, he set the spoon down. "Served as an army scout," he said quietly. 8 years ago. Left after too much blood. Not enough right." The change was immediate. Natalia's spine stiffened, her hand tightening on her spoon until her knuckles showed white. The air between them grew thick with unspoken words. "Army," she repeated, the word falling like stone. Her eyes had gone distant, seeing something beyond the cabin walls. "My husband, he was under Army command when he died." Adam sat very still, recognition dawning cold in his gut. The timing, the location, pieces clicking into place like the hammer of a gun being cocked. "I'm sorry," he said softly, knowing the words were insufficient. "You weren't there," she said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. "No," he answered truthfully, though guilt pressed against his chest. He hadn't been there for that particular death, but his hands weren't clean of others. Silence fell between them, heavy as new snow. They finished their meal without speaking, the only sounds the scrape of spoons and the endless moan of wind outside. As evening approached, Natalia lit the lamp and reached for her Bible. It was well worn, the pages soft with use. She began to read aloud, her voice taking on a different quality, less guarded, touching something deeper than her daily armor allowed. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," she read. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." The familiar words filled the cabin, offering comfort older than their troubles. When she finished the psalm, her Amen hung in the air for a moment before Adam's quiet voice joined it. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Their eyes met briefly before both looked away, understanding passing between them like a current. Whatever else they were, whatever past sins or present fears divided them, they shared this: the need for mercy, the hope of peace. The storm continued its siege outside, but within the cabin, a thin peace had settled. Not trust, exactly, but something like respect. They prepared for another night, Natalia in her chair, Adam by the fire, each watching, each waiting, each holding their own counsel. Yet something had shifted since morning. The space between them felt different, marked now by knowledge that could either heal or destroy. Adam lay down on his bedroll, aware that his confession had changed things irrevocably. The Army connection hung between them like smoke, threatening to choke the fragile understanding they'd begun to build. But for now, there was only the fire's warmth, the wind's voice, and the quiet presence of two souls weathering the storm together. Tomorrow would bring its own trials. Tonight, they had shelter, and that would have to be enough. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-laden landscape in gentle pinks and golds. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a pristine blanket of white that stretched as far as the eye could see. Inside the cabin, Adam Boone stirred from his place by the hearth, the familiar ache in his joints a reminder of too many nights spent on hard ground. The morning silence felt different from the muffled quiet of the storm. Through the frost-etched windows, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Natalia was already up, her quiet movements in the kitchen marking the start of another day. Adam gathered his belongings with careful efficiency, each item finding its proper place in his pack. His fingers brushed against the familiar shape of his army medallion, and he tucked it deeper into a side pocket, away from sight. Some memories were better left buried. "Storm's past," he said, straightening up. "Time I was moving on." Natalia looked up from her work at the stove, her face carefully neutral. "Yes, I reckon it is." Adam reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. The coins inside clinked softly as he placed it on the rough-hewn table. "For your trouble," he said, "and the food." "Wasn't necessary," she replied, though she didn't refuse the offering. "You worked for your keep." He nodded, shouldering his pack. The weight felt right, grounding him in the present moment. "All the same, much obliged for your kindness, Mrs. Kavanaugh." She watched him head for the door, her hands clasped tightly in her apron. Something in her stance suggested she might say more, but the moment passed in silence. Adam stepped out into the crystal morning, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. Inside the cabin, Natalia began her daily routine, trying to restore order to her disrupted world. She swept the floor where Adam had slept, gathered the extra blanket she'd grudgingly provided, and straightened the few dishes they'd used. The cabin slowly returned to its familiar solitude, though somehow the silence felt heavier than before. As she moved his temporary bedroll, something metal glinted in the morning light. Reaching down, her fingers closed around a round object that had slipped free of his pack, an army medallion, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Her heart quickened as she turned it over, reading the battalion number engraved on its face. The world tilted sideways. She knew that number, had memorized it from the official letter that had shattered her world 1 year ago. The same battalion that had led the campaign where Thomas, her husband, had met his end. Time seemed to stop, then rush forward with devastating clarity. Natalia burst through her cabin door, the medallion clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Adam hadn't gone far, his broad figure still visible through the sparkling morning air. "Stop right there." Her voice cracked like a whip across the snow-filled yard. Adam turned, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker as he saw what she held. The color drained from his face. "You were there," she said, each word sharp as icicles. "You were with them, the same battalion that killed my Thomas." "Mrs. Kavanaugh," he began, taking a step toward her. "Don't you dare!" Fury blazed in her eyes, burning away the last traces of pity she'd felt for him. "My husband died because of men like you. Following orders, you said? Was that your excuse when you led them to their deaths?" Adam stood perfectly still, shame etching deep lines around his mouth. "It wasn't like that. If you'd let me explain—" "Explain?" She laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "Explain how you people valued peace treaties less than gold? How you decided which lives were worth saving and which weren't?" Her voice broke, but her anger held firm. "Get out! Get off my land and don't ever come back!" He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. Something in his eyes, grief, guilt, or both, made her look away. Without another word, Adam turned and walked into the vast whiteness, his figure growing smaller until it disappeared altogether. Natalia stood in the doorway long after he'd gone, the medallion burning like a brand in her palm. Eventually, the cold drove her back inside, where the cabin's familiar walls seemed to close in around her. She moved through the rest of her day in a fog, feeding her animals, checking her stores, all while that terrible knowledge gnawed at her insides. The sun had just touched the western peaks when she found it, a folded piece of paper that had been slipped under her door. Her hands trembled as she opened it, reading the careful script. "You're not wrong to hate me, but I owe you, and him, something more precious than my life." For a long moment she stared at those words, feeling them sink into her heart like thorns. Then, with deliberate movements, she walked to the fireplace and held the paper to the flames. The note curled and blackened, taking its mysteries with it into ash. But as darkness settled over the mountain, Natalia found no peace. She sat in her rocking chair, Bible in her lap, unable to focus on the familiar verses. Adam's words echoed in her mind, carrying a weight she couldn't dismiss. What did he mean? Something more precious than his life. What could possibly repay the debt of her husband's death? The night stretched long before her, filled with memories she'd tried so hard to bury. Thomas's laugh, the way he'd read to her in the evenings, his dreams for their future together. And now Adam's face, heavy with a guilt she hadn't understood until today. Both men's shadows seemed to fill the cabin, leaving her alone with questions that had no answers. Outside, a coyote's lonely call echoed through the crystal night, its voice rising and falling like a lament. Natalia wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, but she couldn't shake the chill that had settled in her bones. Dawn was still hours away, and she knew sleep would not come easily. Not with Adam's. Words haunting her thoughts, a promise, or perhaps a threat, that refused to burn away as easily as the paper that had carried them. 2 days passed like molasses in winter. The morning sun had just crested the mountains when Natalia stepped out to tend her goats. Fresh snow crunched beneath her boots as she made her way to the pen, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. The goats bleated their morning greetings, pressing against the fence for attention and feed. "There now," she murmured, scattering hay. "Patience, my pretties." The wind shifted, bringing with it something that made her pause mid-scatter. A sound, faint but distinct, drifted across the snow-covered ground. At first she thought it might be a wounded animal, but there was something human in that cry that made her skin prickle. Natalia set down her feed bucket and listened hard. There it came again, carried on the wind, a weak wail that could only be a child. Her heart jumped into her throat. No child should be out in this wilderness, not with the temperature still bitter from the recent storm. She grabbed her shawl from the fence post and wrapped it tight around her shoulders. "Lord above, guide my steps," she whispered, then set off towards the creek where the sound seemed to originate. The snow was deep in places, and she had to pick her way carefully down the slope. As she neared the creek bed, the cries grew clearer. Rounding a thick stand of pine trees, she stopped short at the sight before her. Adam Boone lay half-sprawled against a fallen log, his clothes crusted with ice. In his arms, wrapped in what looked like old rags, was a small child. A Ute boy, no more than 4 or 5 years old. The child's face was flushed with fever, his small body shivering despite Adam's attempt to shelter him. "Mrs. Kavanaugh?" Adam's voice was barely a whisper, his lips blue with cold. "Thank God." Anger warred with compassion in Natalia's chest. "What have you done? Where did this child come from?" "Found him, abandoned near the old army post." Adam's words came in gasps, his skin frightfully pale. "Couldn't leave him. Please, help him." The boy moaned softly, turning his face into Adam's chest. That small movement decided her. Whatever Adam's sins, this child deserved a chance at life. "Can you walk?" she asked, already knowing the answer as she saw how badly Adam's fingers were frostbitten. He tried to rise but slumped back against the log. "Just take the boy." "Don't be foolish," Natalia snapped. "You'll both freeze to death if you stay out here." She bent down and wrapped her arms around Adam's shoulders. "Come on, lean on me." It was slow, agonizing work. Adam was a big man, and though he tried to help, his legs kept buckling beneath him. The child whimpered whenever they jostled him, each cry cutting straight to Natalia's heart. Somehow she managed to half-drag, half-guide them both back to her cabin. Inside, she quickly built up the fire, adding extra logs until the flames roared high. Put the boy here, she directed, spreading blankets close to the hearth. As Adam carefully laid the child down, she saw how his own hands shook, the fingers waxy white with frostbite. Your hands need tending too, she said, but Adam shook his head. The boy first. Please. Natalia pressed her lips together but didn't argue. The child's clothes were soaked through and his skin burned with fever. Working quickly, she cut away the frozen rags, her breath catching at the sight of old bruises on his thin arms. What happened to him? She asked, as she wrapped him in warm blankets. Don't know. Adam's voice was fading, his eyes growing unfocused. Found him hiding, in an old storage shed. No one else around. He wouldn't let me near him at first. She turned just in time to see Adam sway on his feet. He caught himself against the wall, leaving a bloody handprint where his cracked skin had split open. Sit down before you fall down, she ordered, guiding him to a chair. I need to get herbs brewing for you both. As she worked, gathering dried herbs from her stores and setting water to boil, she could hear Adam's labored breathing mixing with the boy's feverish murmurs. The man kept whispering what sounded like apologies, to the boy, to her, to God. But she forced herself to ignore the words, focusing instead on measuring out the proper portions of yarrow and willow bark. The boy's fever was dangerous high. She soaked cloths in cool water and laid them on his forehead, neck, and wrists, speaking softly in what she hoped was a soothing tone. When he cried out in his native tongue, she hummed an old hymn her mother had sung to her during childhood illnesses. Adam drifted in and out of awareness as she worked, his own fever rising as his body slowly warmed. She had to force him to drink the herbal tea, supporting his head while he swallowed. His skin was hot to the touch, yet he shivered violently under the blankets she'd wrapped around him. I'm sorry, he mumbled as she tended his frost-damaged hands. So sorry. Couldn't save them all. Hush now, she said firmly, though something in his broken tone made her throat tight. Save your strength. The day passed in a blur of tending to both patients. The boy's fever began to break as evening approached, his small body relaxing into true sleep for the first time. Adam's condition was more worrying. The frostbite in his hands and feet was severe, and his fever climbed steadily despite the willow bark tea. As darkness fell, Natalia sank into her rocking chair, exhausted. The cabin was warm, almost too warm, but she didn't dare let the fire die down. The boy slept peacefully now, his breathing even and deep. Adam tossed restlessly in his fever dreams, occasionally calling out names she didn't recognize. Looking at them both, the hardened mountain man and the innocent child, Natalia felt her anger losing its sharp edges. There was something in the way Adam had protected the boy, risking his own life to bring him to safety, that spoke of a deeper truth than she'd been willing to see. Lord, she whispered, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Help me understand. Help me see your purpose in all this. The fire crackled softly in response, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving a profound silence broken only by the quiet breathing of her unexpected guests. Despite her determination to stay angry, to hold on to her righteous grief, Natalia felt something shift inside her, like ice breaking up on a spring river, letting light reach places long dark and frozen. She rose and checked both patients one last time. The boy's fever had dropped considerably, and some color had returned to his cheeks. Adam still burned with fever, but his breathing was stronger. As she adjusted his blanket, his hand caught hers. The boy? He asked, his eyes barely open. He's going to be fine, she assured him. Now rest. His grip tightened slightly. Thank you for having mercy. Natalia found herself squeezing his hand in return, before gently tucking it back under the blanket. "Sleep now," she said softly. "Just sleep." The nights blurred together in a haze of worry and exhaustion. Natalia moved between her two patients like a ghost in the flickering lamplight, checking foreheads, changing compresses, and brewing endless pots of healing tea. The boy's fever had lessened, but Adam's burned fierce and steady, his skin hot as summer rocks beneath her touch. "Please, the boy first," Adam would mumble whenever she tried to tend to him, his words slurred with fever. "Promise me, save him first." "Hush now," she'd reply, wringing out another cool cloth. "The boy's mending. You're the stubborn one giving me trouble." On the third night, when the wind howled particularly fierce outside, Adam's fever peaked. He thrashed against the blankets, calling out in his delirium about blood on his hands and souls he couldn't save. Natalia pressed cool compresses to his neck and chest, whispering prayers between each breath. "Lord, if it be your will," she murmured, "spare this man. Whatever his past, whatever his sins, grant him the chance to make them right." The boy watched from his bed of blankets near the hearth, dark eyes solemn in his small face. He'd grown stronger each day, though he spoke little and jumped at sudden movements. But there was something in the way he watched Adam that spoke of trust earned, not given easily. Near dawn, Adam's fever finally broke. His skin cooled beneath Natalia's hand, and his breathing eased into the rhythm of natural sleep. She sagged in her chair, bone-weary but grateful. A small tug at her skirt made her look down. The boy stood there, swaying slightly on weak legs. Before she could scold him for getting up, he reached for her hand. "Ma," he whispered, his fingers curling into hers with complete trust. The word struck her like a physical blow. Memories she'd locked away came flooding back, dreams of children she and Thomas had planned but never had, hopes buried with him in that lonely military cemetery. Her throat tightened as the boy leaned against her leg, his small body radiating warmth and need. "You should be resting, little one," she managed to say, but her free hand was already stroking his dark hair. "Ma?" he said again, more insistent this time. He pointed to the empty cup beside Adam's bed, then made a drinking motion. Understanding bloomed. "You want to help me take care of him?" The boy nodded, his face serious beyond his years. Together they filled a cup with fresh water. Natalia supported Adam's head, while the boy carefully helped tip the cup to his lips. Adam swallowed weakly, then opened his eyes. "Thank you, young warrior," he whispered in a voice rough from fever. The boy's answering smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Over the next few days, as Adam's strength slowly returned, Natalia noticed how different he was with the child. His large, scarred hands turned gentle when helping the boy wrap in a blanket or reaching to smooth his hair. He spoke softly, never making sudden moves, and seemed to understand the boy's silences as clearly as words. It was during one quiet evening, with the boy already asleep by the fire, that Adam finally spoke of his past. "I was so proud when I joined the army," he said, staring into his cup of tea. "Thought I was serving a righteous cause, keeping the peace, protecting settlers." His fingers tightened around the cup. "Took me too long to see what peace meant to some commanders. Burning villages, breaking treaties, using fear to control people who'd lived on that land for generations." Natalia sat very still, her mending forgotten in her lap. She thought of Thomas, of his letters describing the challenges of maintaining order on the frontier. He'd never mentioned atrocities. "The last straw was a village in the mountains," Adam continued, his voice dropping lower. "Commander ordered us to drive them out. Middle of winter, just like this. There were children, elders. He closed his eyes. I couldn't do it. Couldn't be part of it anymore. So I warned them. Helped them escape. Deserted that same night. That's why you left the army? Natalia asked, her throat tight. Adam nodded. Been trying to make it right ever since. Working trap lines, sending money to widows and orphans when I can find them. It's not enough. Never will be. But I had to try. And the boy? Is that why you risked your life for him? Found him hiding in that old storage shed, half frozen. No sign of his people anywhere. Adam's eyes grew distant. He had the same look I saw in that village. Terror mixed with defiance. Couldn't leave him there. Couldn't fail another child. The boy stirred in his sleep, making small, distressed sounds. Without thinking, Natalia moved to comfort him, humming softly until he settled. When she looked up, she found Adam watching them with an expression that made her heart twist. I know about Thomas, he said quietly. Your husband. He was with the 7th Cavalry at Pine Ridge. Natalia's hand stilled on the boy's blanket. Yes. He was a good man. One of the few who tried to prevent bloodshed. Adam's voice was heavy with old pain. I was there that day. Saw him stand between our troops and a group of women and children. He died protecting them. Tears, she thought, long dried up, welled in Natalia's eyes. The official report said he was killed in a skirmish. Because the truth would have shamed them. Your husband was a hero, Mrs. Kavanaugh. He died showing mercy. Something broke loose in Natalia's chest. Not the sharp pain of grief, but something softer, like spring thaw after a long winter. She looked at Adam, really looked at him, and saw not the enemy she'd imagined, but a man as haunted by the past as she was. The money you left, she said slowly. It wasn't payment for shelter, was it? Adam shook his head. Been trying to find you for months, to tell you the truth about Thomas, to make what amends I could. The boy whimpered again in his sleep, reaching out blindly. Without hesitation, both Natalia and Adam moved to comfort him. Their hands met over his small form, and for a moment neither pulled away. Maybe, Natalia said softly. Mercy is its own kind of justice. Adam's eyes met hers, filled with a hope he seemed afraid to trust. I don't deserve forgiveness. None of us do, she replied, remembering countless sermons about grace. That's what makes it grace. The boy settled between them, his breathing deep and peaceful. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving a profound silence broken only by the gentle crackling of the fire. In that quiet moment, Natalia felt something shift in her heart, like the first green shoot breaking through winter-hard ground, promising new life where she thought nothing could grow again. The days melted into each other like snow dripping from the eaves. Morning light found Adam outside before dawn, his boots crunching across the frozen yard as he made his way to Natalia's aging fence line. His fingers, still tender from frostbite, worked carefully with hammer and nails, replacing rotted posts and mending breaks where winter storms had pushed the rails askew. Inside the cabin, Natalia watched through frosted window panes as she prepared breakfast. The boy sat at her table, slowly spooning porridge into his mouth, his dark eyes following her movements with quiet attention. Need to check Adam's bandages, she murmured, more to herself than the child. Those hands won't heal proper if he keeps working them so hard. The boy, whom they'd taken to calling Little Hawk after he'd pointed excitedly at a bird swooping over the yard, nodded as if he understood perfectly. He'd been teaching them words in his language, patient with their clumsy pronunciation. Tahu, he'd said one morning, pointing to himself, then to the hawk. The name felt right, bringing a rare smile to his solemn face. Natalia gathered her healing supplies, clean bandages, the salve she made from herbs, warm water in a basin. When she stepped outside, Adam was wrestling with a particularly stubborn fence post. "That's enough for now," she called. "Come, let me see to those hands." He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "Much obliged, ma'am, but I reckon I can manage a spell longer." "The fence won't mend any faster if you damage yourself worse," she countered, her tone brooking no argument. It was the same voice she'd used on Thomas when he'd tried to work through fever or injury. The thought of her husband didn't sting quite as sharply now. Perhaps it was the way Adam ducked his head and came obediently to the porch, reminding her that good men could share the same traits without diminishing each other's memory. Little Hawk appeared at her side as she unwrapped Adam's bandages. The boy watched intently as she cleaned and examined the healing flesh, then helped her apply the salve with careful fingers. "You've got a gentle touch, young healer," Adam told him softly in English, then attempted the Ute word for thank you they'd learned yesterday. Togoyak. Little Hawk beamed, correcting Adam's pronunciation with a patience beyond his years. They practiced together until Adam got it right, their breath fogging in the crisp air. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings began with prayers, Natalia reading from her worn Bible, while Adam listened respectfully, and Little Hawk traced the book's leather cover with wondering fingers. Then came chores, feeding animals, hauling water, preserving what food remained from winter stores. Adam worked steadily at the endless tasks a homestead generated, while Natalia split her time between household duties and tending to their lingering injuries. One evening, as snow fell in lazy spirals outside, they sat around the table sharing a simple supper of beans and cornbread. Little Hawk had taught them the Ute words for the food before them, making a game of it that had them all laughing at their mistakes. When the meal was done and the boy dozed by the fire, Natalia noticed Adam staring into the flames, his expression distant. "What troubles you?" she asked softly. He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. "Been thinking about prayers," he finally said. "Used to believe in them something fierce. Believed God could forgive any sin if a man was truly sorry." His hands clenched on the table. "After what I saw, what I was part of, I stopped asking. Figured some things were beyond forgiveness." Natalia thought of her own prayers through the long months after Thomas's death. How they'd started as pleas for understanding, turned to bitter accusations, then finally settled into tired repetition of familiar words that felt hollow but wouldn't let her go. "Maybe he's still listening," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Maybe that's why you were brought here, through that storm." Adam looked up, meeting her eyes across the table. "To a widow whose husband died because of men like me?" The first hints of spring whispered through the valley as dawn broke over the mountains. Adam stood in the yard, checking the harness on his mule, while Natalia wrapped bread and dried meat in a cloth for his journey to town. Their supplies had dwindled through the long winter, and the promise of warmer days meant it was time to restock. Little Hawk watched from the doorway, his small fingers gripping the wooden frame. Though he'd grown stronger over the weeks, a shadow of worry crossed his face whenever anyone left the cabin. Adam crossed to him, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. "I'll be back before sunset," he said softly, touching the leather pouch that hung around the child's neck, his most precious possession. "Keep an eye on the goats for me?" Little Hawk nodded solemnly, then surprised them both by throwing his arms around Adam's neck in a quick hug before darting back inside. Adam stood slowly, his throat tight with emotion he hadn't expected. Natalia appeared with the wrapped provisions. "The list is all here," she said, handing him both food and paper. and there's enough money in the pouch for everything we need." She hesitated, then added, "Be careful on the road. Spring thaw brings all sorts through the pass." "I'll keep my eyes open," Adam assured her. He secured the provisions in his saddlebags, conscious of her watching him. These past months had built something delicate between them, trust layered over old wounds, like new grass growing through snow. The journey to town took most of the morning. The trail wound down from the highlands through patches of melting snow and mud. Adam kept to himself as he passed other travelers, touching the brim of his hat in greeting, but avoiding conversation. Years of solitude had taught him the value of silence. The town sprawled along the valley floor, a collection of wooden buildings and muddy streets coming to life with spring commerce. Adam tied his mule outside the mercantile and stepped into the warm interior, nodding to the shopkeeper as he began gathering supplies from Natalia's list: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for her shotgun, thread for mending. While the shopkeeper totaled his purchases, voices drifted from the back room, the sharp, distinct tones of military men. Adam kept his head down, but his ears caught every word. "Deserter from the 7th Cavalry. Name's Boone. Adam Boone." "That scout who went missing after the Apache campaign?" "Same one. Word is he's been spotted in these parts. General wants him brought in, dead or alive." Adam's hands remained steady as he counted out coins, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The shopkeeper wrapped the supplies in brown paper, chattering about the weather, but Adam barely heard him. His mind raced through options, each one darker than the last. He loaded the supplies with deliberate care, checking each package was secure. No need to draw attention with haste. The soldiers' voices continued from inside, discussing search patterns and patrol routes. Adam mounted up and pointed his mule toward home, keeping to an unhurried pace until he cleared the town limits. Once out of sight, he urged the mule to a faster clip. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail as he pushed higher into the mountains. Every snapping twig and rustle of wind set his nerves on edge. He'd known this day might come, had prepared himself for it. But now there was more at stake than his own life. Dusk was settling when he finally reached the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window he could see Little Hawk helping Natalia prepare supper. The sight squeezed his heart with an ache he couldn't name. He cared for the mule first, unsaddling and rubbing him down, carrying supplies inside in several trips. Only when everything was stored did he allow himself to meet Natalia's questioning gaze. "What's wrong?" she asked, reading his face as she'd learned to do these past months. "Something happened in town." Little Hawk looked up from where he sat by the fire, his dark eyes serious. Adam gestured toward the door, and Natalia followed him onto the porch. The spring evening was cool, stars beginning to pepper the darkening sky. "Army patrols in the area," he said quietly. "They're looking for me. Seems my past has caught up at last." Natalia's hand flew to her throat. "How close?" "Too close. They'll be searching these mountains within days." He squared his shoulders. "I should leave tonight. Get as much distance as I can before they start asking questions." "No." The force in her voice surprised him. "The root cellar's deep, well hidden. You can stay there until they pass through. We'll tell them we haven't seen anyone matching your description." Adam shook his head. "I won't put you and the boy at risk. And running forever, that's not living. It's just waiting to die." "Then stay through Sunday's thaw," she pleaded. "At least give us time to make a proper plan. The boy needs you. She stopped, looking away. Adam studied her face in the gathering darkness. The months had softened something in both of them, built bridges neither had expected to cross. The thought of leaving tore at him worse than any physical pain. "Through Sunday," he agreed finally, though fear flickered in his eyes. But if there's any sign of patrols before then, I ride out. I won't have your kindness repaid with soldiers at your door. Natalia nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Inside, they could hear Little Hawk humming one of his tribal songs, the melody drifting through the cabin walls like a prayer. "We'll figure something out," she said softly. "God didn't bring you through that storm just to abandon you now." Adam wanted to believe her. He'd seen enough mercy in this place to make faith seem possible again. But as darkness settled over the mountains, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, like spring snow melting too fast in the sun. They returned inside, where Little Hawk had set the table for supper. Neither adult spoke of what waited beyond Sunday's thaw, for now there was warm food, lamplight, and the comfort of familiar faces. Treasures Adam had thought lost to him forever, found again just as danger threatened to sweep them away. The morning sun climbed high over Natalia's homestead, warming the patches of melting snow. She stood at her kitchen window, kneading bread dough while watching Little Hawk chase the goats through puddles of spring mud. The boy's laughter drifted through the cabin walls, lightening her heart despite the worry that had settled there since Adam's return from town. A glint of metal in the valley caught her eye. She wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the glare. Her breath caught in her throat. A column of soldiers wound their way up the mountain trail, their blue uniforms stark against the brown landscape. At their head rode a familiar figure that made her stomach clench, Captain Silas Harlan. "Adam," she called softly through the open door. He appeared beside her, his face hardening as he spotted the approaching patrol. "Get Little Hawk," he said quietly. "I'll ready the hiding place." Natalia hurried to gather the boy, who came willingly when she called. Inside, Adam had already pulled back the rug and lifted the loose floorboards that concealed the shallow space beneath. He'd spent yesterday preparing it, laying blankets and ensuring there was enough airflow through the cracks. "Like a game," Natalia whispered to Little Hawk, helping him down into the space. "Stay very quiet like when you hunt." The boy nodded solemnly, clutching his medicine pouch. Adam squeezed his shoulder before lowering himself in beside him. Natalia replaced the boards and rug just as hoofbeats thundered into her yard. She forced herself to walk slowly to the door, wiping her hands on her apron as if she'd merely been interrupted at her baking. "Mrs. Kavanaugh," Captain Harlan called out, swinging down from his horse. He removed his hat with a flourish that made her skin crawl. "Looking lovely as ever." "Captain Harlan," she replied stiffly. "What brings the army to my door?" He climbed the porch steps, too close for comfort. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Natalia, surely we're past such formality. After all, your dear Thomas served under me." He gestured at the cabin. "May I?" She had no choice but to let him enter. 6 soldiers remained mounted in her yard, their eyes scanning the property. Inside, Harlan walked the room with careful steps, running his gloved hand along her furniture as if checking for dust. "We're searching for a deserter," he said, casually. "Adam Boone, former scout, dangerous man, abandoned his post during the Apache campaigns. Been spotted in these parts." He turned to face her, watching for any reaction. "You haven't had any suspicious trappers pass through, have you?" Natalia kept her face neutral, though her heart pounded so hard she feared he might hear it. "Folks sometimes stop for water or trade," she said, "but no one matching that description." Harlan picked up a coffee cup from her table, the one Adam had used that morning. "2 cups? Expecting company?" "I often set out 2, she said quietly. "Old habit since Thomas." Something flickered in Harlan's eyes. Satisfaction? Guilt? He set the cup down and moved closer. You know, I've always felt responsible for you, Natalia. After what happened to Thomas, perhaps I should check on you more often. The false concern in his voice made her want to scream. Instead, she lifted her chin. I manage fine on my own, Captain. Sir, a voice called from outside. Tracks leading to the creek, fresh ones. Search the outbuildings, Harlan ordered through the door. To Natalia, he added, You won't mind if my men have a look around? Strictly routine. She gestured consent, praying her face betrayed nothing as boots clomped through her home. They searched every corner, every cabinet. One soldier's heel scraped across the rug covering the hiding place, and Natalia held her breath. But they found nothing. After what felt like hours, the soldiers reported the property clear. Harlan lingered in her doorway. We'll be camping just down the valley tonight. If you think of anything useful, send word. His eyes held hers a moment too long before he finally mounted up and led his men away. Natalia waited until the patrol disappeared around the bend before rushing to lift the floorboards. Adam emerged first, helping Little Hawk up. The boy immediately ran to the window, watching for any sign of the soldier's return. He knows, Adam said grimly. He's not just searching for a deserter. He knows exactly where to look. Natalia sank into a chair, her legs weak with relief and tension. Why? Why would he? She stopped as a memory surfaced. Thomas's last letter before his death. He'd written about intervening when an officer had attacked an Apache woman, but hadn't named names. Adam's face was dark with old pain. I saw him once at Fort Griffin. There was an Apache camp that had been promised protection. Harlan ordered it burned. He glanced at Little Hawk, lowering his voice. There was a young woman. Couldn't have been more than 17. She was crying outside the ruins, begging him to help her. He rode away like she was invisible. Thomas tried to help her, Natalia whispered. That's why... Tears sprang to her eyes as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. My husband died protecting her from him. And I didn't stop it, Adam said hoarsely. I was there, saw what kind of man he was, but I did nothing. Just followed orders until I couldn't anymore. He met her gaze. Your husband was braver than I was. He did what I should have done. Little Hawk came to stand between them, sensing their distress. He took both their hands in his small ones, humming softly, the same prayer song he used to comfort himself. Natalia squeezed his fingers gently, feeling God's presence in the simple gesture. The truth's coming to light, she said softly. All these years I thought Thomas died in a skirmish gone wrong. But God's revealing the real story, piece by piece. She looked at Adam. You're part of that truth. Maybe that's why he led you here through that storm. Adam's expression softened as he watched Little Hawk, who had moved to the window again. Harlan won't give up easily. He's got too much to lose if the truth gets out. Then we'll face him together, Natalia said firmly. Thomas died standing up to evil. We can do no less. The afternoon light slanted through her windows, catching the dust motes in golden beams. Outside, her goats bleated, and a spring wind rustled through the awakening trees. Everything looked ordinary, peaceful, but Natalia knew their lives had shifted onto a new path, one that would require all the courage and faith they could muster. Little Hawk's quiet humming filled the cabin as they began preparing their evening meal, each lost in thought but drawing strength from their shared purpose. God's hand was at work, Natalia felt certain. Now they just had to trust his timing as the full truth emerged. The mountain night wrapped Natalia's cabin in darkness, broken only by the gentle glow of dying embers in the hearth. She'd given Little Hawk her bed, while she and Adam kept their usual places. She in her rocking chair, he on his bedroll near the fire. The quiet was deep, peaceful, until a piercing scream shattered the stillness. "No, Father! Please!" Little Hawk's voice rang with terror. "Harlan!" Natalia bolted from her chair as Adam sprang to his feet. They reached the boy together, finding him thrashing against the quilts, tears streaming down his face. His small hands clutched his medicine pouch as he cried out again in a mix of English and Ute. "Shh, little one," Natalia soothed, gathering him into her arms. "You're safe. It's just a dream." She rocked him gently while Adam lit the lamp, its warm light pushing back the shadows. Little Hawk's eyes flew open, wild with fear until he recognized their faces. He buried himself against Natalia's shoulder, his whole body trembling. Adam knelt beside them, his weathered face etched with concern. "You called out a name, son," he said softly. "Harlan. Do you know that man?" The boy stiffened. His fingers worked nervously at the leather pouch around his neck. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Father?" Natalia's breath caught. She met Adam's eyes over Little Hawk's dark head, seeing her own shock mirrored there. "Captain Harlan is your father?" she asked gently. Little Hawk nodded, then pulled back enough to open his medicine pouch. From it, he withdrew a small, tarnished button, an army officer's button. "Mother gave. Said keep safe. Remember, Father?" His lower lip trembled. He left. Never came back. Adam's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained steady. "Can you tell us about your mother, son?" Tears welled in the boy's eyes. "Soldiers came. Said move away. Mother's sick. She say find Father." His small face crumpled. "I ran long time. Got lost. Cold." "Until Adam found you," Natalia finished softly, understanding now why the boy had been alone in the snow. She held him closer, her heart aching for his loss. Adam stood abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. Natalia could almost feel the fury radiating from him, not at the child, but at the man who could abandon his own son. "That's why he's really here," Adam said, his voice rough. "He must have heard rumors about a Ute boy in the area. He's not just hunting me, he's trying to erase his shame." Natalia's arms tightened protectively around Little Hawk. The boy had drifted into an exhausted sleep against her shoulder, his small face finally peaceful. "Dear God," she whispered. "First Thomas, then the Apache woman, now this child. How many lives has that man destroyed?" Adam turned back to them, moonlight silvering his profile. "He won't touch this boy, I swear it." "But how can we protect him?" Natalia asked. "Harlan has the law on his side. He's a respected army officer. Who would believe our word against his?" "There might be others," Adam said thoughtfully. "Other women he's wronged, other witnesses to his crimes. If we could find them—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "But that would mean leaving you both vulnerable while I searched." "Then we face this together," Natalia said, her voice trembling but determined. She looked down at Little Hawk's sleeping face, seeing now hints of his father's features softened by his mother's heritage. "God brought him to us for a reason. Brought us all together for a reason." Adam crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. His rough hand covered hers where it rested on Little Hawk's back. "I'll die before I let Harlan harm either of you," he said quietly. "You know that, don't you?" Natalia turned her hand to grasp his. "I know, but I'm praying it won't come to that." She met his gaze steadily. "We need you alive, Adam Boone. This boy needs a father who'll love him truly, not just claim him by blood." Something shifted in Adam's eyes. Hope, perhaps, or the first glimmer of self-forgiveness. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "The night's almost gone," he said, glancing at the window where the first hint of dawn painted the sky. "We should pray." Natalia nodded. Carefully, so as not to wake Little Hawk, she slipped from the rocker to kneel beside Adam. He took her hand again, and they bowed their heads together. "Lord," Adam began hoarsely, "we don't know your purpose in all this, but we trust you. Protect this innocent child. Give us wisdom to shield him from those who'd harm him. And," he paused, swallowing hard, "help us find a way through this that brings justice without more bloodshed." "Amen," Natalia whispered. She added her own silent prayer. "Thank you for bringing this man to my door that stormy night. Thank you for showing me that love and forgiveness can bloom even in winter's heart." They remained kneeling together as dawn's first light crept into the cabin. Little Hawk slept on, secure in the knowledge that he was no longer alone. The bond between the three of them, forged in tragedy and strengthened by love, felt more real than any tie of blood. Adam finally stood, helping Natalia to her feet. "I'll start breakfast," he said softly. "You both should rest while you can." Natalia settled back in the rocker with Little Hawk, watching as Adam moved quietly around her kitchen. The simple domesticity of the scene brought tears to her eyes, tears not of sorrow this time, but of gratitude. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. Outside, the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-touched peaks in gold. A new day was beginning, bringing with it both danger and hope. But for now, in this peaceful moment, Natalia felt the presence of God's love surrounding them like a warm blanket, protecting and sustaining them for whatever lay ahead. The spring sun climbed high over Natalia's homestead, warming the mud-churned snow around the cabin. Little Hawk sat at the kitchen table, carefully drawing pictures with a stub of charcoal while Natalia kneaded bread dough. Adam remained hidden in the root cellar below, though his presence felt as solid as a heartbeat beneath their feet. The drumming of hooves shattered their peace. Natalia's hands froze in the dough. Through the window, she spotted a dozen soldiers fanning out across her property, their blue uniforms stark against the melting snow. Captain Harlan sat tall in his saddle, directing his men with sharp gestures. "Little Hawk," she whispered urgently, "under the bed, now, don't make a sound." The boy's eyes went wide with fear, but he obeyed, scrambling beneath the iron frame just as boot steps thundered up her porch. Without waiting for a knock, the door burst open. 2 soldiers entered, rifles ready. "Ma'am," one said curtly, "Captain's orders, property search." Natalia straightened, wiping flour from her hands with deliberate calm. "I showed you everything yesterday. New orders." The soldier jerked his head, and more men pushed past her. They overturned furniture, pulled books from shelves, and thrust bayonets into her mattress. Natalia pressed her lips together, watching her home being torn apart. A crash from her bedroom made her flinch, her mother's china lamp, now in pieces on the floor. "Nothing here, Sergeant," a voice called. "Check the barn." Natalia's heart pounded as soldiers streamed toward her barn. The structure held only hay and her winter stores, but the search brought them dangerously close to the root cellar's hidden entrance. A shout split the air. "Sir, over here!" Her blood ran cold. A soldier emerged from behind the woodpile, dragging Little Hawk by his collar. The boy had tried to run. Well, well. Captain Harlan dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. He studied Little Hawk's face with cold calculation. "What have we here?" Little Hawk struggled, but the soldier's grip held firm. Natalia started forward, but another soldier blocked her path with his rifle. "He's mine," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "An orphan I took in." Harlan's lips curved in a cruel smile. "Is that so?" He crouched before the boy, gripping his chin. Interesting features, wouldn't you say? Almost familiar? Little Hawk spat in his face. Harlan backhanded him, the crack echoing across the yard. Natalia cried out, struggling against the rifle barrel. "Search that barn again," Harlan ordered, wiping his face. "Thoroughly, and if our deserter's supplies are hidden inside—" He pulled a match from his pocket, striking it against his boot. "Well, contraband must be destroyed." "No." Natalia lunged forward as Harlan tossed the match onto the hay-strewn barn floor. Flames caught instantly, racing up the dry wooden walls. She fought like a wild thing, shoving past the soldier who held her. Her goats bleated in terror inside the burning structure. "My animals, please!" "Stand down, Mrs. Kavanaugh," Harlan drawled, "unless you'd prefer charges of assaulting federal officers." The barn crackled and roared, black smoke billowing skyward. Natalia threw herself toward the door, but strong hands grabbed her shoulders, dragging her back. She kicked and screamed, watching helplessly as her livelihood went up in flames. "Let her go!" Adam's voice boomed across the yard. He stood in the open, hands raised, having emerged from his hiding place. "I'm the one you want." "Adam, no!" Natalia's cry caught in her throat. Harlan's smile widened. "Sergeant, secure the prisoner." Two soldiers rushed forward, forcing Adam to his knees. The clank of iron shackles cut through the roar of the fire. "Noble of you, Boone," Harlan said, circling him slowly. "Though I expected nothing less. Your weakness was always misplaced mercy." He glanced at Little Hawk, who still struggled in the soldier's grip. "Speaking of mercy, what should we do with this little half-breed?" "Touch him again," Adam growled, "and no prison will hold me." Harlan laughed. Bold words from a man in chains. He turned to Natalia, who had sagged in her captor's grip. "Your charity is admirable, Mrs. Kavanaugh, but wasted on traitors and mongrels." "The only traitor here is you," she spat. "My husband died protecting your victims, and now I know why." Something dangerous flickered in Harlan's eyes. "Careful, widow. Slander against an officer is a serious charge." The barn's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a shower of sparks into the blue spring sky. Natalia's goats had fallen silent. She felt their loss like a physical blow. "Get him up," Harlan ordered. The soldiers yanked Adam to his feet. "We march for Fort Lewis within the hour. The deserter will face military justice." He smirked, "Though I doubt he'll survive the journey." "Please," Natalia begged, her voice breaking. "He's done nothing wrong." "Wrong." Harlan's face hardened. He abandoned his post, betrayed his oath. Men died because of his cowardice. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Though I suspect your concern runs deeper than Christian charity. Tell me, Mrs. Kavanaugh, what would your dear departed husband think of you harboring his murderer?" Natalia recoiled, as if struck. Adam struggled against his chains, but the soldiers held him fast. "That's not true," she whispered. "Thomas died in an Apache raid." "Did he?" Harlan's eyes glittered. "Or did our friend Boone here lead him into an ambush? Ask him. Ask him where he was that night." "Don't listen to him, Natalia," Adam said hoarsely. "He's twisting everything." "Enough!" Harlan barked. "Move out!" The soldiers dragged Adam toward the waiting horses. He fought every step, twisting to look back at Natalia. "Keep him safe," he called. "I'll find a way back to you both." Natalia broke free of the soldier's grip and ran forward, but Harlan blocked her path. "Consider this a kindness," he said softly. "I could arrest you too, but I respect Thomas's memory enough to spare his widow." He glanced at Little Hawk. "The boy stays. He has a debt to pay." "No!" Little Hawk screamed as Harlan grabbed his arm. "Mama! Adam!" The title, "Mama," struck Natalia like lightning. She launched herself at Harlan, clawing at his face. He shoved her hard, sending her sprawling in the muddy snow. "Restrain her if she interferes again," he ordered, then swung into his saddle, pulling Little Hawk up behind him despite the boy's struggles. Natalia could only watch, her body shaking with sobs, as the soldiers mounted up. They rode out in formation, Adam stumbling between two horses, Little Hawk's cries growing fainter with distance. Her barn smoldered behind her, sending thick black smoke into the pristine mountain sky. When they disappeared around the bend, she fell to her knees beside the smoking ruin. The heat of the dying fire pressed against her face, but she barely felt it. Her world had collapsed as surely as the barn's timbers. "Our Father," she prayed aloud, her voice raw with tears, "who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The familiar words carried her through her grief. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." She prayed for Adam's safety on the long march to Fort Lewis, for Little Hawk's protection in Harlan's cruel hands, for justice to rise like the sun, burning away the shadows of lies and hatred. Most of all, she prayed for strength to find a way to save them both. The barn's embers popped and hissed, a hot wind carrying ashes across the muddy yard. Natalia remained on her knees, prayer after prayer rising with the smoke toward heaven. She would not give up hope. God had brought them together for a purpose. Somehow, she would find a way to make things right. "Thy will be done," she whispered again, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. "On earth as it is in heaven." Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the ruins of Natalia's barn in harsh golden light. She stood before the blackened timbers, shovel in hand, her shadow stretching long across the mud-streaked snow. The acrid smell of wet ash filled her nose as she began to dig. Each shovelful felt heavier than the last. Bits of charred wood and twisted metal emerged from the debris, remnants of tools, tack, and feed bins. Her muscles ached, but she pressed on, needing to clear away this reminder of yesterday's violence. Near what had been the barn's eastern corner, something glinted in the morning sun. Natalia knelt, brushing aside sooty splinters. Her breath caught. There, half buried in the muck, lay Adam's silver cross pendant. The chain had snapped, likely torn from his neck during the struggle, but the cross itself remained unmarked by flame. She cradled it in her palm, remembering how it had caught the firelight during those first nights when Adam slept by her hearth. He'd clutched it often while lost in thought, as if drawing strength from its presence. "Ma'am?" A timid voice called from behind her. Natalia turned to find Little Hawk hovering uncertainly at the edge of the ruins, his small fingers twisted in the fabric of his borrowed shirt. The sight of his bruised cheek made her heart clench. "Come here, sweet boy," she said softly, opening her arms. He ran to her, burying his face in her skirts. His thin shoulders shook with silent sobs. "We'll find a way," she whispered, stroking his dark hair. "God hasn't abandoned us." She looked down at the cross in her hand, its silver surface catching the light. Or Adam. After a moment, she straightened, decision crystallizing in her mind. "Help me saddle, Thunder," she told Little Hawk. "We're riding to Durango." The boy's eyes widened. "The soldiers won't stop us from seeking justice." She tucked the cross into her pocket. Truth is God's weapon, and we aim to wield it. Within the hour, they were mounted on her sturdy bay gelding, Little Hawk secured before her in the saddle. The morning air bit cold as they descended from her homestead into the valley, hooves crunching through patches of lingering snow. Durango rose before them by mid-morning, a clutch of wooden buildings huddled beneath the towering peaks. As they rode down the muddy main street, Natalia felt the weight of stairs. Whispers followed their progress. "That's the Kavanaugh widow." Harboring a deserter, they say. Indian boy with her now. She kept her chin high, though her cheeks burned. Little Hawk pressed closer against her, sensing the hostility. The telegraph office occupied a narrow building between the Mercantile and the Assayers. Natalia dismounted, lifting Little Hawk down after her. Inside, the operator's brass key clicked steadily, filling the small space with its rhythmic tapping. The operator, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, looked up from his work. His friendly expression cooled when he recognized her. "Mrs. Kavanaugh," he said stiffly, "what can I do for you?" "I need information about a military prisoner," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Adam Boone, taken yesterday by Captain Harlan's men." The operator's mouth tightened. "Military matters aren't public business, ma'am." "Please." She laid a silver dollar on his desk. "I only need to know where they're holding him." He hesitated, then swept the coin into his drawer. "Wait here." The key resumed its clicking as he sent her query down the line. Little Hawk watched, fascinated, as the machine chattered its coded message. Natalia found herself counting her heartbeats, praying for answers. Finally, the response came. The operator translated the dots and dashes, his frown deepening. "Prisoner arrived at Fort Lewis this morning," he read. "Military tribunal convenes in 3 days' time." He looked up, something like pity in his eyes. "Desertion in wartime carries a heavy penalty, Mrs. Kavanaugh." "He's innocent," she said firmly. "Thank you for your help." Outside, the afternoon had turned gray, heavy clouds gathering over the mountains. Natalia led Thunder toward the church at the edge of town, its weathered spire reaching toward the darkening sky. The sanctuary stood empty and cold, smelling of old hymnals and dusty sunlight. Natalia sank into a pew, drawing Little Hawk close beside her, the cross in her pocket pressed against her heart. "Lord," she whispered, her voice echoing in the stillness, "forgive my bitterness. I've carried hate too long, letting it poison your grace." Tears slid down her cheeks. "Help me find the courage to stand for truth, no matter the cost." "Amen," came a quiet voice from behind her. She turned to find Pastor Wilkes emerging from the shadows near the altar. The circuit preacher's kind face bore its usual gentle smile, though concern lined his eyes. "I heard about yesterday's trouble," he said, settling into the pew beside her. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing Adam Boone to your door." "You know him?" Natalia asked, surprised. "I knew him before he left the army," Pastor Wilkes nodded. "A good man, tortured by the evil he witnessed. His desertion wasn't cowardice. It was conscience awakening." He reached into his worn satchel, withdrawing a packet of letters. These might help at his trial, testimonies from others who served with him, documenting the atrocities that drove him to flee, and my own witness to his character. Natalia took the papers with trembling hands. "Why did you keep these?" "Because truth needs guardians," the pastor replied simply, "and mercy needs defenders." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "The Lord brought you together for healing, not vengeance. Remember that in the days ahead." "I will," she whispered. "Thank you." Little Hawk had dozed off against her arm, his face peaceful in sleep. Pastor Wilkes studied him thoughtfully. "The boy complicates matters," he said. "Harlan won't easily surrender his claim." "He surrendered that claim when he abandoned his own blood," Natalia said fiercely. "Little Hawk deserves better than that man's poison." The pastor nodded slowly. "Then we must pray for wisdom to protect him and courage to face what comes." He rose, adjusting his coat. "I'll ride to Fort Lewis tomorrow. Speak to some old friends there. God's justice often works through human hands." Natalia clutched the precious letters, hope kindling in her chest. Outside, thunder rumbled in the gathering dusk. A storm was coming, but she no longer feared its fury. She had found her path forward, not through hatred or revenge, but through faith and the relentless pursuit of truth. She gathered little Hawk into her arms, his small body warm against her chest. Together they would weather this tempest, trusting in God's promise of justice and mercy. The cross in her pocket pressed against her heart, like a seal of testimony, reminding her that love could build bridges where bitterness had burned them down. The garrison hall loomed before Natalia like a fortress of stone and shadow. Morning sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting iron-barred shadows across the polished wooden floor. The room buzzed with muttered conversations as officers and witnesses filed into their seats. Natalia smoothed her black dress, worn from her husband's funeral, and now pressed into service again. Little Hawk waited outside with Pastor Wilkes, safe from the immediate proceedings. The packet of letters lay heavy in her pocket, alongside Adam's silver cross. Captain Harlan stood at the prosecution table, his brass buttons gleaming, his posture rigid with authority. 3 senior officers sat at the raised tribunal bench, their faces carved from the same stern granite as the mountains outside. Adam sat apart, chains binding his wrists, his shoulders straight despite the weight of accusation. "This tribunal is now in session," announced the center judge, Colonel Matthews, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Captain Silas Harlan, present your charges." Harlan stepped forward, boots clicking sharply on the wooden floor. "I bring before this tribunal the deserter Adam Boone, formerly a scout with the 7th Cavalry. In time of war, he abandoned his post, betraying his oath and endangering his fellow soldiers. Furthermore, he has been harboring a native child without proper authority, in violation of reservation regulations." The words struck Natalia like physical blows, each calculated to paint Adam as a traitor rather than a man of conscience. She watched him absorb the accusations without flinching, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the tribunal bench. "How does the accused respond?" Colonel Matthews asked. Before Adam could speak, Natalia rose from her seat. "I request permission to testify on behalf of the accused." Surprise rippled through the room. Harlan's face darkened. "This is highly irregular, Colonel. Mrs. Kavanaugh is a civilian, and a woman besides. I am also the widow of Lieutenant James Kavanaugh," Natalia cut in, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "My husband served under Captain Harlan. I believe I have testimony relevant to both the accused and the accuser." Colonel Matthews studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Proceed, Mrs. Kavanaugh." Natalia moved to the center of the floor, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. She drew Adam's medallion from her pocket, holding it up so it caught the light. "This medallion belongs to Adam Boone. It marks him as a man who served with honor until he could no longer reconcile his conscience with the actions he witnessed." She turned to face Harlan directly. "Actions perpetrated by men like Captain Harlan, who abuse their authority and abandon their responsibilities." "This is slander," Harlan snapped. "Colonel, I must object." "The boy outside," Natalia continued, her voice growing stronger. "The one Captain Harlan claims was illegally harbored. He is the captain's own son, born to a Ute woman and left to die when the tribes were forcibly relocated." A shocked silence fell over the room. Harlan's face had gone white with fury. "These are baseless accusations," he sputtered. "Where is your proof?" Natalia withdrew Pastor Wilkes's letters. "I have here testimonies from soldiers who served alongside both Adam Boone and Captain Harlan. They document not only the circumstances of Adam's departure, but also Captain Harlan's treatment of the Ute people, including the boy's mother." Colonel Matthews accepted the papers, scanning them with growing concern. The other officers leaned in to read over his shoulder, their expressions grave. "Furthermore," Natalia continued, "my husband died trying to prevent one of Captain Harlan's peacekeeping operations, an attack on an unarmed Apache camp. Adam Boone was there. He can testify to what really happened that day." Adam lifted his head, meeting her eyes across the room. The gratitude in his gaze gave her strength to continue. "Bring in the boy," Colonel Matthews ordered. Pastor Wilkes led Little Hawk into the hall. The child's eyes darted fearfully around the room until he spotted Natalia. "Ma!" he cried out, breaking free and running to her. Natalia gathered him close, feeling his small heart racing against her skirts. A murmur ran through the assembled officers as they noted his features that bore an unmistakable resemblance to the man who now stood trembling with rage at the prosecution table. "This is absurd," Harlan spat. "The woman is clearly manipulating. The boy carries your blood, Captain," Natalia said firmly. "Any doctor can confirm it. Will you deny him again before God and these witnesses?" Harlan's control finally snapped. With a roar of fury, he lunged forward, his hand raised to strike Little Hawk. The child cried out in terror. In that instant, Adam moved with explosive force. Despite his chains, he threw himself between Harlan and the boy, taking the blow across his own shoulders. "There is no greater love," he shouted, his voice ringing through the stunned silence, "than to lay down one's life for another." The scripture verse echoed off the garrison walls. Colonel Matthews rose to his feet, face thunderous. "Captain Harlan, stand down immediately." 2 guards seized Harlan's arms, restraining him as he struggled and cursed. Little Hawk clung to Natalia, trembling but unhurt. Adam remained between them and Harlan, a living shield despite his bonds. "Colonel," one of the other officers spoke up, "these letters contain serious allegations. Multiple witnesses attest to Captain Harlan's misconduct, including the incident that led to Lieutenant Kavanaugh's death. And Adam Boone's desertion appears to have been an act of conscience," added the third officer, "not cowardice. He continued to serve others even after leaving the army, at great personal risk." Colonel Matthews nodded slowly. "Guards, remove Captain Harlan to the stockade pending investigation of these charges." He turned to Adam. "Mr. Boone, this tribunal will need to verify Mrs. Kavanaugh's evidence, but in light of these revelations, you will be held under house arrest rather than in the garrison cells." "And the boy?" Natalia asked, her arms still protective around Little Hawk. "Given the circumstances and Captain Harlan's demonstrated behavior, I believe the child is best left in your care for now, Mrs. Kavanaugh." The colonel's stern face softened slightly. "God's justice works in mysterious ways. This tribunal is adjourned until further notice." As the guards led Harlan away, his face twisted with impotent rage, Natalia felt tears of relief sliding down her cheeks. Adam stood slowly, his chains clinking, and turned to face her. In his eyes, she saw not just gratitude, but something deeper. A hope reborn, a faith restored through love's courage to speak truth to power. Little Hawk reached out one small hand toward Adam. "Stay with Ma?" he asked hopefully. "That's up to the colonel now, little one," Adam replied gently. "But I reckon God ain't finished with any of us just yet." The morning sun streamed through the garrison windows, turning the iron bars' shadows into crosses of light across the wooden floor. Natalia touched the silver cross in her pocket, remembering her prayer in the empty church. God's justice had indeed worked through human hands, through testimony and truth, through courage and conscience, through love strong enough to break the chains of bitterness and fear. The garrison hall emptied slowly, leaving Natalia alone on a hard wooden bench. Through tall windows, she watched shadows stretch across the parade ground as morning turned to afternoon. Little Hawk dozed in her lap, exhausted by the morning's drama. Her fingers traced gentle circles on his back, feeling each small breath like a prayer answered. The minutes crept past like molasses in winter. Other wives brought her coffee and cornbread, their eyes now soft with sympathy instead of judgment. She managed weak smiles but couldn't eat, her stomach knotted with waiting. "Ma?" Little Hawk stirred, blinking up at her. "Where Adam?" "The officers are talking to him, little one," she whispered, smoothing his dark hair. "We must be patient." Inside the tribunal chamber, she knew 3 officers weighed testimony against regulations, mercy against military law. She had done all she could. The rest lay in God's hands. The garrison clock struck 4 times before boots finally echoed in the corridor. Colonel Matthews emerged first, his face unreadable. The other officers filed out behind him, followed by a clerk carrying papers. Natalia stood, steadying Little Hawk on his feet. "Mrs. Kavanaugh, Mr. Boone, please approach," Colonel Matthews called. 2 guards brought Adam forward, still in chains, but standing straighter now. Natalia moved to stand beside him, Little Hawk clinging to her skirts. The colonel cleared his throat. "This tribunal has reached its decisions. Captain Silas Harlan is hereby placed under arrest for multiple charges: perjury before a military court, child abandonment, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer. He will remain in custody pending court-martial." A soft murmur rippled through the onlookers gathered at the hall's edges. The colonel raised his hand for silence. "Regarding Adam Boone, having reviewed all testimony and evidence, this tribunal finds that his actions, while technically constituting desertion, were motivated by moral conscience and demonstrated consistent dedication to humanitarian principles." He paused, meeting Adam's steady gaze. "In light of documented acts of humanity in the field, including the rescue of an abandoned child at great personal risk, this tribunal commutes any sentence to immediate honorable discharge from service." The words hung in the air like morning mist. Natalia heard herself gasp softly as the guard stepped forward with keys. The chains fell away with a musical clinking, leaving Adam standing free in the afternoon light. "Thank you, Colonel," Adam said quietly, rubbing his wrists. "Don't thank me," Colonel Matthews replied. "Thank the Lord and this good woman who fought for justice." He gathered his papers. "This tribunal is concluded. Go in peace." Natalia felt tears spill down her cheeks as Adam turned to her. Without words, they bowed their heads together, offering silent gratitude to God. Little Hawk wrapped his arms around both their legs, creating a circle of grace in the emptying hall. Outside, the spring air felt sweeter than any Natalia could remember. She hitched up her wagon while Adam spoke briefly with Pastor Wilkes, who had waited through the long hours. As they prepared to leave, a small crowd gathered in the garrison yard. Mrs. Peterson from the Mercantile stepped forward first, arms laden with quilts. "For the boy," she said softly. "Nights are still cold up your way." Others followed, the blacksmith's wife with a basket of fresh bread, the cooper offering a barrel of salt pork, the schoolmistress bringing books for Little Hawk. One by one, the townsfolk who had whispered and turned away now came bearing gifts and apologies. "We was wrong to judge," old Mr. Turner said, his hat in his hands. "Sometimes the Lord's justice looks different than man's." Natalia thanked them through tears, touched by this outpouring of community restored. Adam helped her load the wagon, his movements sure and unhurried. Little Hawk bounced excitedly at each new offering, his trauma forgotten in childish delight. As the sun began to set, painting Durango's buildings in gold and rose, they finally prepared to depart. Adam lifted Little Hawk onto the wagon seat between them, settling him carefully on the new quilts. "Ready to go home?" he asked them both. Natalia gathered the reins, feeling strength flow through her arms. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let's go home." The wagon rolled forward, hooves and wheels clattering on Durango's streets. Behind them, the garrison flag fluttered in the evening breeze, and ahead, the familiar road beckoned toward her homestead. Little Hawk leaned against her side, humming softly. Adam sat tall beside them, free at last to face the future without chains of guilt or fear. Together they headed toward the mountains, where healing could begin. Spring came to the valley like God's own paintbrush, washing away winter's stark palette with tender greens and wild mountain flowers. The morning frost retreated day by day, leaving behind soil ready for planting and new beginnings. Adam stood in the barn's half-finished frame, measuring twice before cutting the thick pine beam. Sawdust dusted his shoulders as morning light streamed through the open rafters. The new structure was larger than Natalia's old barn, with sturdy walls that would withstand whatever storms the mountains might bring. "Water break," Natalia called from below, her voice carrying clearly in the cool air. He climbed down the ladder, accepting the tin cup she offered. Little Hawk darted between them, wielding a small hammer with solemn concentration as he helped by tapping every board he could reach. "Careful there, son," Adam cautioned, smiling. The word felt natural now, after these months together. Little Hawk had bloomed like the valley itself, his nightmares fading as security and love wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Natalia rested her hand on Adam's arm, studying the barn's progress. "It's coming along beautiful," she said. "Lord, surely blessed us with fine weather for building." "And good neighbors," Adam added, nodding toward the stack of lumber gifted by the sawmill owner. After the trial, the town had embraced them fully, as if making up for past suspicions with double measures of kindness. They worked through the morning, the sound of hammering and sawing mixing with meadowlarks' songs. Little Hawk collected nails in his pocket and carried tools back and forth, proud to be part of the effort. By noon, the main frame stood complete, reaching toward the Colorado sky like open arms. After a simple lunch of bread and dried apple slices, Natalia led Little Hawk to the garden plot they'd prepared. The boy knew his letters now and carefully read the seed packets aloud as she showed him how to plant each variety. "Carrots, peas, corn," he pronounced carefully, dropping seeds into the furrows with focused precision. Adam watched them from the barn, his heart full. Who would have thought that one desperate night, when he'd bargained for shelter from the storm, would lead to this? God's mercy worked in ways beyond human understanding. The afternoon sun wheeled overhead as they continued their labor of love. Adam installed the hayloft flooring, while Natalia and Little Hawk planted rows of potatoes and beans. The soil was rich and dark, promising abundant harvests to come. As evening approached, Adam turned his attention to a special project he'd been saving. In the cabin's main room, he carefully carved letters into a new crossbeam, each stroke deep and true. Natalia found him there as twilight softened the air outside. "What are you working on?" she asked, stepping closer. Adam stood back, letting her read the words he'd carved. "For one night of mercy, the Lord gave me a lifetime of grace." Tears welled in her eyes as she traced the letters with gentle fingers. "Oh, Adam." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Seemed fitting to mark it somehow. Everything good in my life came from that night you opened your door." "Even though I held a shotgun on you?" she asked with a watery laugh. "Especially then," he smiled. "Showed me you had sense to go with your mercy." Little Hawk burst through the door, trailing garden dirt and excitement. "Ma, Pa, come see! The bells." They followed him onto the cabin's porch. Sure enough, the evening breeze carried the sweet sound of church bells from the town below. Sunday services would be ending soon, and though they hadn't made it to church today, the familiar pealing reminded them of God's presence in their work. The setting sun painted the valley in shades of gold and rose, touching every new leaf and blade of grass with glory. Their freshly planted garden stretched in neat rows, promising future abundance. The new barn stood proud against the mountainside, its raw wood gleaming. Little Hawk took off running through the young wheat field they'd sown weeks earlier. Green shoots parted around him like water as his laughter carried on the wind, pure and joyful. His small figure darted this way and that, chasing meadowlarks or his own happiness. It was hard to tell which. Natalia leaned against Adam's shoulder, her hand finding his. "Listen to that laugh," she said softly. "Who'd have thought such joy could come from so much sorrow?" "The Lord's mathematics," Adam replied. "He multiplies our small mercies into more than we can imagine." He squeezed her hand. One night's shelter became a lifetime's blessing. They stood together, watching Little Hawk play as the church bells faded into evening's hush. The boy's laughter continued to ring out, carried on the spring breeze like a hymn of its own. Here was living proof that forgiveness could outlast the harshest winter, that love could build something new from broken pieces. The crossbeam's words above them spoke truth. Mercy given freely, even once, could blossom into grace without end. As darkness settled softly over their mountain home, they knew they were witnessing a miracle as real as any in Scripture, the miracle of hearts healed, family forged, and love triumphant over fear. Little Hawk ran back to them, breathless and grinning. "Can we have story time now?" "Of course, little one," Natalia smiled. "Let's thank the Lord for this beautiful day first." They bowed their heads together on the porch, their gratitude too deep for many words. The evening star appeared above the mountains, bright as hope, as they went inside to close another day in the life they'd built together. A life that proved how a single act of mercy could transform 3 lonely souls into a family, bound by love stronger than blood or time. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.